What's up guys, my name is Marc Steiner, and today we are going to be reviewing the Sony 90mm macro. Let's get right into it. So first things first, let's talk about the physical lens itself. It's about the same size as the Sigma 35mm 1.4 for Sony E-mount, but is significantly lighter. It's still going to be front heavy on your camera, but not to the same extent. It's very manageable. Looking at this lens, it's a very pretty lens. If you see this out in the wild, you think, oh, that's a nice lens. And I love that it has the markings for macro on here when you're doing manual focusing. It just, one, looks very aesthetically pleasing. It looks like a high-end Leica lens with that orange writing on it. Looks very nice, like very vintagey. I really appreciate that. And then right above that, you have this really nice manual focus ring. It's like an all-metal build grill right here. You can, you hear that? That's all metal. That's not rubber rings that you find on pretty much any other lens. That's high-end metal. And they went with this like very cheese grating pattern, so it's very interesting. It's not as comfortable as a rubber ring, but it definitely feels like it's going to last longer, and it's built like a tank. Also, what I love about this is that you can just flip it down, and now you have manual focus override right on this lens, which is so helpful. When you do use the manual focus override, it does have hard stops on the macro end, so it's very helpful to know when you've reached minimum focusing distance, and you can work it from there. It doesn't keep rolling like some other lenses to infinity. You just have that very nice little stopping point. You can hear hard stops. You've reached maximum focusing distance. A lot of lenses have the manual focus override as a switch on the back, but with a macro lens, it's really nice to just override it right then and there when you're shooting in the moment, and that's super helpful to have. Moving towards the buttons on the side of this lens, you have a customizable button like you do on most good Sony lenses, so that's always nice to have just because you can do anything you want with that. But on the side here, you'll notice the omission of that manual focus switch because of the convenience of the ring. Instead, we have optical image stabilization, which is absolutely incredible that it is in this lens, and that just makes this lens so much better, especially at this price point, and we'll talk about that later. But on top of that, you also have the focus limiter, and I much prefer this implementation of the focus limiter than the previous lens I reviewed, the 100mm STF. And this one is so helpful because you have the full range, but you can then limit it to 0.5 meters to infinity or 2.8 to 0.5 meters. So you can go super macro, normal space, or just the full range if you want that ability. And that is such a nice thing to have. So if you're wondering why your shots aren't in focus when you're at a certain focusing distance, you can just flip a switch and you don't need to be worried about that. It's just really convenient, super helpful. So that's about it for the physical lens itself. Let's talk about performance. This lens performs really, really well, and it's very versatile like all macro lenses. You can do portraits with it, you can do product photography with it. I think a lot of people who are interested in this lens want it to do macro photos. It is a macro lens, and for wedding photographers who want that detail shot of the rings or detail shots of stuff at the wedding, it's super helpful. And for other people who want to do product photography, really helpful. But it's not only for macro stuff. You can use it very easily as a portrait lens, and it performs really, really well. And it's super, super sharp. It's as sharp as my 85 1.8, which is one of the sharpest lenses I've played with. Absolutely love it, and you can very easily use this for portraits. It focuses very well. I would say that in terms of its focus range, once you start getting into macro territory, it doesn't focus as well as the rest, and that's to be expected. It's a macro lens. But when you're comparing it to the 85 1.8 in terms of focusing performance at normal focusing distances, I'd say that the 85 is definitely faster focusing. You're going to have things more in focus. It's just better focusing overall, but the 90mm is very, very respectable, and you're not going to be bummed about its focus performance at all. The minimum focusing distance of this lens is 0.28 meters, and that is going to give you a 1:1 reproduction. That's what you want out of a macro lens. You want that 1:1 reproduction. That is the reason why people will buy a high-end macro lens. You're not going to settle for something that doesn't hit 1:1. With that minimum focusing distance, you're practically able to get things in focus right up towards the lens, because it's about 11 inches of minimum focusing distance, and from the focal plane of the camera, you're able to get very, very close. It is a macro lens. However, you are going to need a lot of light when you are that close, because not enough light is going to be hitting your subject, so you'll have to use flash or some really strong lights if you really want to take advantage of that. I found that while using this lens, if you're within the further range of macro territory, it's going to perform very well with autofocus, But once you start getting into that closer macro photography range, it's going to really struggle with autofocus, which is not surprising. It is a macro lens. You're working with such shallow depth of field that it's just razor thin. It's almost impossible to get it manually. I would not expect my camera to be able to get it in focus at that shallow of a distance. So that's why they have the manual focus override. You can just put it on and then use your own manual focus, especially with focus peaking on the Sony cameras, comes in very, very helpful. It's a match made in heaven. Let's talk about what other lenses are on the market in this kind of territory. You have the 70mm from Sigma and you have the 100mm from Tokina. The Tokina and the Sigma are both more budget friendly. However, if you're looking for a professional level lens with all the features to back it up, this is by far the best. The other two are going to suffer from chromatic aberration. They're not going to have the same features. And the biggest thing for me is that the other two have this massive barrel that comes out of the lens. This one focuses all internally. Nothing is protruding out of the lens. It's so nice to have that, especially out of a macro lens. So when you're comparing it to the other things on the market, sure, they might be $500, $400 cheaper, but this is getting such better performance, like such a night and day difference, that it's worth investing in that higher end glass. And although this is only rated as a G lens, not a G Master, it definitely holds up to having a G Master moniker. It is that good. The fact that this has optical image stabilization built in makes everything so much better. That's a feature you don't see on any high-end lens. It's really difficult to put that into a lens and make it small and compact and still perform really well. And Sony was able to do that, and that just changes everything. It's so helpful to have that when you're shooting photo, but as well as video. So if you're looking for macro territory lenses and you're thinking about the Sigma and you're thinking about the Tokina, I would highly recommend saving up a little bit more and buying the Sony, because it's going to be such a big difference. If you're not focusing on macro stuff only and you're thinking about using this more for portraits, I think this is also a really good lens, especially if you're doing makeup beauty shots in the studio. This, I think, is the best lens for that kind of stuff. Makeup beauty shots in the studio, this is where this thing is going to succeed. It's so sharp, you can stop it down, you're working in a studio environment, so you have all the light you need, and you're gonna get that beautiful detail, but you can get in even closer if you need to because of the macro capabilities of this lens. If you're not using it for studio makeup photography work where you're in a stationary position and you're thinking you like it as a run and gun lens, it also works with that. But when you start getting into that territory, I think that the 85, if you're only using it for portraits, the 85 1.8 is a much better bang for your buck, and it's going to perform better, and the bokeh on the 85 1.8 is going to be cleaner, more round, a little bit more cat-eyed, but on the macro lens, the bokeh is going to be a little bit octagonal just because of the way that the aperture blades are shifted in this lens. On the video side of things, this lens again performs very well in terms of normal focal range, but when you start getting into macro territory, you want to use manual focus. That's just how it goes. When you're that close and the focal plane is that tiny, you need to be using manual focus. I highly recommend a tripod. It's not going to do well with crazy handheld shots that you're tracking everything. No, this is like for very detailed up close things. You want a couple seconds for a shot and then call it a day. That OSS does come in handy for handheld shots if you need to do that, but if you're doing professional work, highly recommend using the manual focus for video. For this next test, I forgot to bring my tripod, so everything you see here is shot handheld, but look at that stabilization. Sure, it is 120, but it is so creamy, so smooth, and I can't believe how stable I was able to get this handheld. This looks really, really good for a handheld shot. So it takes a second for the lens to actually hit critical focus on Rachel's eyes, and this is a theme throughout the test here. It does a very good job of getting the person in focus, but it takes a little extra second to hit that critical focus. As you see here, we can adapt to her being in focus, but it just takes that extra little second to hit that critical focus, which is what we want. As you saw with the background right there, it kind of focuses in steps. It's not as smooth as other lenses that I've tested before. And here with Rachel, it transitions to her being in focus, but only achieves critical focus after a hot second. On to the IAF test. This is post 3.0 firmware update, so we're getting the latest and greatest in eye tracking, and it does a fairly good job. There's no complaints here whatsoever. Again, it's not the fastest lens I've ever tried when it comes to IAF, but it does a very good job at tracking. However, when Rachel goes out of the frame, it seems to lose focus completely and do this massive focus hunting, which is super weird. But when she gets back into frame, it catches right back on the eye, which I find super surprising. So overall, this lens is a steal. For $1,000, for $900 to $1,000, you can find this lens on sale for $900. It's usually around $1,050, but this is such a good value for what you're trying to accomplish. You're not going to be disappointed by this lens. This thing outranks all of the other high-end macro lenses. We talked about some third-party ones, but if you look at Nikon's or Canon's offering, this blows those out of the water. And the fact that it's about the same price as them is a little bit more expensive, and it's come down in price from when it was initially announced, but for around $1,000, you're not going to find anything that's better than this. This is the cream of the crop when it comes to macro lenses, and I highly recommend using this lens if you're looking for a good macro lens. Alright guys, that's it for me. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you have this lens? Are you thinking about buying this lens? Are you going to be buying this lens if you are thinking about it? My name has been Marc Steiner, and I will see you next time.
wait, I wasn't ready for that. What's up guys, it's Rachel here shooting with...
Hit me.
What's up guys, it's Rachel here with...
Oh, you gotta hit.
Oh,
you gotta
hit the camera?
Well, don't actually hit it, but like just that motion.
What's up guys, it's here with...
It's here with...
You didn't say your name, Rachel.
Alright guys, so I'm here with Rachel, and we are killing it today.
Ooh,
what up,
what are we doing
guys?
today, Rachel? We are getting
You're shooting my eyes.
beautiful macro shots of your beautiful face, cause yeah.
That's what we're doing, and we're gonna nail it.
Stay tuned.